thank you so much for coming in here today, Tracey. Really appreciate that you've made the time. Can you introduce yourself to the people who are watching this video, a bit about your background?
Okay, I'm Tracey, and I've been involved in ECE since my son, a friend introduced me to Play Centre when he was 18 months old. So I've started in Play Centre and I did a few of my papers through them. I was then involved in a fantastic kindergarten, and I was encouraged to study from there. And from there I worked in a community-based centre of mixed age. I've worked in a kindergarten position. I then moved into the ministry, so I was a senior advisor there for about a year and a half. And I've also been an area manager for independent centres, so centres that had owners that did not have any educational background.
So it was like a combination of different centre owners
Yes.
who got together and hired you to help be their area manager?
It was an agency that provided services, so each individual centre owner would make contract to us.
Okay.
So it was very interesting because you got to visit a lot of different people in a lot of different centres, and of course each of the owners had their own philosophy, their own practices that they want prioritised, and so it was an interesting, very interesting role.
Cool. All right, and so today we want to talk about why are ECE teachers considered glorified babysitters, and we were talking a little bit earlier on before this podcast, and it sounded like you have a lot of views on it. So yeah, would you like to share what are your thoughts on why that came about? Like how did this perception even begin?
So kindergarten in New Zealand was the initial point, and it's been around for a very long time. And the teachers then developed their own diploma system, so that you got a kindergarten diploma.
Yep.
Then, with parents, going back to work, daycares sort of developed. Each government also has their intention about what they want, early childhood to be for, whether it's for developing social competence, or the previous national government, they just wanted 96% of children to be participating in early childhood. So that was their drive. That was about just providing enough centres so that there were places for children to attend. This government really hasn't made clear what its priorities are for early childhood, I don't feel. There's been a lot of discussion, but there hasn't actually been a lot of money put aside or discussion about what their goals or intentions might be. Other listeners might know more about that. But obviously a big part of early childhood is for the government, as far as getting experienced, qualified people to be back into the employment as soon as possible after having had children.
Yep. Yep.
And I think financially, particularly in Auckland, two people generally do have to go back to work so that they can pay for things.
Yep.
So the sector's changed from being about education. Kindergarten was always very much about children being able to develop their social skills. It was about being able to play with your peers, and now it's very much about care. And
right, yeah. And I have a feeling as well, a lot of parents, when they send their kids to an early childhood centre, I think what plays in their minds, I don't know what kind of percentage that is, but I think there is a percentage out there that seems to think as long as it's safe, that's all I care about, because mommy and daddy needs to work and make money to provide food on the table, and so in their minds they just look at it as a babysitter, just someone to hey, look, as long as my kid doesn't get injured and I can pick him back home after that, that's all I want, And I think that may have driven a bit of that perception of how ECE teachers are just babysitters.
Yeah,
Just
I would agree with that.
drop the kid off, and off they go. Basically, it could have been with like a salt diaper, haven't had breakfast or whatever, and then that's, you just look after them, and when I come back, I'll take them back. That's it. Whereas I feel if a lot of if that thinking changed to a mindset where parents drop their kids off thinking, what is my kid going to learn today? I found it amazing that over the past couple of months now they've managed to draw properly, or even write certain letters, or do certain things, and they can see that kind of developmental outcome. Then I think that shift will change from just a babysitter
Sitter.
to an ECE teacher that helps really nurture and help grow this child's development.
So we talked earlier about how parents, or there's always a cultural view of a child. So whether it's that they're just naive, they're an empty vessel to be filled, they need to be shaped. That's why we discipline them, because if they're naughty. Whereas in early childhood, we try to see children as competent. So if they're stretching the boundaries, that's them showing that they're curious, or that they're trying something different and new, or that they're strong-minded. And those are all skills that when you're older are valued. Those are the skills that you want. Particularly, there's a lot of talk about it from a person called Guy Claxton in the UK about how we don't know what jobs are going to be like in the future. So with our children, we need to be developing these skills where they can have relationships with other people, so that they can work collaboratively, that they are curious, that they're prepared to keep learning, they're prepared to take a risk, they're prepared to step outside their comfort zone. But parents don't necessarily understand that hasn't necessarily been explained to them as the skills and knowledge that they're going to need for the future. Culturally, and I can only speak for New Zealand, it's always been about, are they ready for school? Do they know 1 to 10? Do they know their ABCs? A friend has just had her son have the 4-year Plunkett check, and one of the first things they wanted them to know was, could they recite 1 to 10? So it just shows that in the broader part of our culture today, that is still where our priorities lie. And I'm not quite sure when we're going to make the change, because there's been the Canterbury studies, the outcomes from that, Nathan Wallace's, he communicates what's been discovered, through brain research, and it all comes back all the time to those first 3 years. Those first 3 years are the most important. Yep. Got to throw in as much language as you can. You have to give them experiences. As far as their body development and their brain development, they need to have textural experiences through their hands, their feet, through their eyes, their ears. They have to experience outdoors and nature. But I always remember reading years ago about how parents or teachers will yell when it's raining, get in, like they're all going to be burnt by acid, or, and that rain is scary or something that you shouldn't. And those, I think, are possibly those reactions. It's all about the care. Get them in before they get cold. Get them in before, instead of that pause of let them experience what rain feels like. That it's warm in the summer, cold in the winter. But parents want you to keep them safe. They want you to keep them warm, and they want you to just make sure that they're fed and watered and sleep well.
So that's from a parent's perspective, right? Like there are parents who just simply view it as a babysitting job, because to them all they care about is that they drop off their kid, they can go to work, and they come back and they pick the kid back up again, and as long as the kid is safe, that's it for them. So that's the parent I can sort of see how the parents can sort of drive that perception. My question as well is, in a indirect way, it's just a question. Could it also be where how a lot of the philosophy in early childhood centers is also around play? Could that in any way also drive the babysitting impression, because
Yes.
if we talk about play a lot and parents go there and they go, what's your center about and what's your philosophy? And then all the centers all talk about play is important, play, and they're just thinking, yeah, so you guys are babysitters. I have a babysitter at home over the weekend when we go out. They play with my babysitters, and if I go to drop my kid off at the daycare center or an early childhood center and all they do is play, yeah, they're just
true.
babysitters. But what fails to sort of get passed across is that there has been a lot of research and play is important for mind development and all that, but that doesn't get passed on. Parents just go. They're just thinking, my kid plays all day. All right, okay.
So since Te Whāraki in 1996, play obviously has been a really big part of the program, and it's been split into those areas, those 5 strands, and how are we using play to promote those learning outcomes within those 5 strands. But in some areas it has fallen into where teachers were starting to, not all teachers, but there was a space where it was very much just leaving the children to get on with it, because if we interfere with their play, then we're interrupting and we're imposing our answers on them. We're not allowing them to be curious. We're not allowing them to
solve their own problems.
Solve their own problems. Yep. And hence why in 2017 there was a review and an updated version of Te Whāraki put out. That was part of the reasons, was that they wanted teachers to start talking about the curriculum again, and the importance of them actually being engaged with the children, not taking over their play, but working alongside them. So when it came to science, talking about scientific principles when you're doing water play, or bubbles, so just introducing those ideas to children so that they were starting to develop numeracy. So how do we do numeracy through play? What does literacy look like through play? What does science look like through play? What does mathematics look like through play? So there can be that planning and that thinking about what's our role and that reflective thought when it came to the planning. But I feel that part of the issue is, as we discussed earlier, teachers aren't getting opportunities to have these conversations together collaboratively, because the hours for daycare are so very long. So you'll work for 8 hours and then be asked to stay after work. You've got your own children, you've got your own things happening. If you look at the general kindergarten model, which is evolving and changing as well, very much so, but it would be the children would arrive at 8:30 generally and leave at 2:30, and the teachers would leave at 5. So there was that whole space to have those conversations, do that planning, create those environments, think about what you needed to do, and also to do your learning stories. So learning stories is our key communication with parents. And again, that's another area where there's always a lot of discussion about, do we talk to parents about the research in our learning stories, or are we going to overwhelm them? Do they even read our learning stories, or do they just want to know that when they pick their child up that they were fed and had a good day playing? Yeah.
So it sounds like there's a lot to it.
It's very complex. Yeah.
I mean, if we want to go by the kindergarten model, and it's 8:30 to 2:30, so it gives enough time for teachers after 2:30 to do their own planning and meetings and all that kind of stuff, then how does that fit in with the parents? Because a lot of parents do work really long hours.
That's the thing, it doesn't. So we have to really think about what are we going to do within the daycare model to allow those situations to happen for staff. And I don't really know the answer to that. I don't think anybody's found the answer to that one just yet.
Because if it's if that is sort of an ideal kind of working model which provides for the teachers to be able to do proper, having some time set aside during the day to do the planning, the meetings, and all that kind of stuff, Then regardless of the size of a center, I do think you know, it a shift. A teachers, there needs to be different shifts for teachers. If 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 you if you want to give like say 6 hours teaching on the floor and then like extra 2 hours after that for them to do their own planning and all of that, and the center opens, early in the morning and late at night to cater to the parents that are out there, then I think then you will need a combination of shifts then, isn't it? Especially if you want to limit the teachers' hours on the floor so that you give them sufficient time and you don't overload or overbear them. Then
so teachers currently will do shifts and they have non-contact time, but that non-contact time generally is on your own. So there isn't that that time to reflect and to discuss with others. Because at the end of the day, I feel that education is very much a collaborative process. That is where the ministry is seeing primary school teaching now. Is very much more the collaborative. They're looking at those open learning environments where there's an overlap and the children are sharing. Guy Claxton is talking about how one of the critical things we're going to have to need in the future is that ability to communicate and talk with each other and share ideas, and because that's where our future's looking. But our ECE teachers aren't getting, that's not being made available to them within the learning centres that they're working in, and that's purely because there hasn't been a solution found yet. And maybe it's just not a priority because for many centre owners, it's about keeping the parents happy. And if the parents are happy, and that's where there's a professional gap, because people aren't seeing that it is a profession. They're not understanding that it's not just about randomly putting things out for children. That's just keeping them occupied. That's not planning for their learning. And then there's also all of the documentation that goes on behind. Teachers are expected to review policy. Teachers are expected to do learning stories. Teachers are expected to have documented planning. Teachers are expected. There's all these expectations from ministry, from ERO, which operates separately, from within their own centre, and it's not acknowledged, because at the end of the day, majority of parents just do see us as babysitters. They just, as you said, they just want the children to be safe.
And before this podcast, we were talking a bit earlier about the language that's being used and how that could also affect perception, right? That is
referred to as an industry.
That was one of it. That was one of it. But also, I agree with you. Like if you use certain words that's associated with a certain brand or a certain outcome, could that also be the case with this, where when you think about babysitters, you tend to think about care, you tend to think about play, you tend to think about not much learning outcome, you tend to think about these kind of things, just being kept safe until the parents come back, and then off you go.
Yeah, just entertained.
Just entertained. No trouble. Everyone's safe until we come back, and your job is done, kind of thing. And therefore, and I think you touched on this quite well. Is there could be a number of those words, number of those kind of associations being made, which kind of therefore lumps the ECE teachers into that kind of category quite easily, because when you make such connections, such associations, it's quite easy to just lump it all together.
And to see it as that role,
because
it would be interesting to know if when parents talk about centres, my centre, they often say, they're looked after really well. That'll be their top sort of. It's a great centre. They look after them really well, and they provide all their meals. That's what I hear a lot from my friends. You'll say, they're at it's a great centre. I love it. The teachers are really friendly. They're always are happy, and they provide the meals.
And there you go. I suppose I think that paints a really clear picture. Therefore, in people's mind, that they go, that's probably very close to what a babysitter does. Maybe a step up, and therefore the term a glorified babysitter comes in, for that matter. Yes, that's very interesting.
So as a profession to change it, I suppose we would need a lot more support from the government. They would have to start seeing us more as professionals.
Because do you think they don't? Do you think that their focus is more of looking at you guys as a means to get more parents into the workforce?
Yes, to keep children safe and parents happy.
Children safe, so parents feel comfortable to go back to work, and then they can start earning taxes, and that helps the economy.
Yes.
Right.
And I don't think that either, there isn't any political party that has stepped up and said, we actually really need to value our ECE teachers on a consistent basis. This is what they're doing. This is, that first 1,000 days. You don't hear them talking about the first 1,000 days and how critical that is. You don't hear them talking about ECE when they're talking about resolving crime in prisons, or because at the end of the day, it all kind of links.
Yep.
We were talking yesterday about how parents parents used to ask teachers, how do you think we should manage this, or what should we do, and now if a teacher approaches parents and say, I think your child's really ready to start toilet training. No, it really works for me to have them in nappies. That there isn't that, they really know what they're talking about. I value their expertise. I value their opinion. They are extremely knowledgeable about my child. They spend all this time with my child, and I value what they're saying. It often seems to be more of that's not really going to work for me and my family, so we'll just keep things in the status quo, and I'll let you know when we're ready.
Right. Okay, so you're saying there's also another aspect where even families themselves don't see ECE teachers as professionals.
Knowledgeable.
Has certain expertise. You probably don't get that from a doctor, right? If the doctor goes, I think you should be sleeping earlier, I think you should be eating more greens. You don't go, that doesn't really suit our family too well. I finish work at 11, how can I sleep earlier than that if I come back home and I still gotta, prepare, clean the house and all that kind of stuff, and my lifestyle doesn't enable me to eat more greens, so no. But you get that a lot, I suppose, when in ECE, when parents don't view ECE teachers as professionals, and they talk back and they go, we can't do that.
Yeah, we're not prepared to do that. But that happens with, we don't want them to get wet, we don't want them to play in the sandpit, we don't want them to, and is part of our role to challenge those, and when I say challenge, it's more to explain to them what the values of those areas are, or is it to accept and meet what their demands, because we want to keep them happy, because if we keep them happy, then they tell us what a great centre it is, and then they'll bring new... And
they'll continue sending their child back to the centre, and...
Because it's a very competitive environment now.
It is.
It has changed.
It is. I mean, when you see a lot of centres offering
free nappies,
lots of stuff, free
meals.
Yeah, free meals.
School scholarships.
Lots of hours, all that kind of stuff. Even 6 months, if you sign up or if you refer someone, it can be quite competitive, and so therefore I think it wouldn't be in their interest to offend the parent by saying, I'm the professional, you should do as I say.
So as educators, we often have to compromise our own, what we know to be best practice. We sometimes have to walk a fine line around that. And then what sort of example are we setting as experienced professionals when we do that to, for staff who aren't so experienced? Do we stand up for what we know is the best learning outcomes for that child, or do we just accept that it's okay for their child not to do that? I mean, yeah.
It is,
and that's not always about. That's where it comes into having that relationship. You can say to a parent, "Yeah, that's fine. We'll be able to do that for a short time." But there's going to come a time when, the sand is something that we provide, and it has all these, and you can list off what the learning values are in it, and why it's an important area for their child to be able to experience.
I mean, okay, so let me just bring up this thought that I just had here. The medical industry, right? Basically funded by the government, like doctors, in the hospitals and all that. So they are answerable to the government, and they want to make sure that they do what's right by the government. So when a person comes in with diabetes or any other sickness or illness, they can remain neutral is not the right word, but they can remain objective and go, this is why it's happened, this is the cause, this is how we're going to treat you. And if the patient goes, I'm not going to quit smoking, I'm not going to quit drinking, they're not going to try to bend over backwards the same kind of way that maybe ECE teachers probably do. And I feel it's probably because as you've touched before, it's probably because the government hasn't funded it as much as the government has funded medical. So when the patients don't pay any money in the hospital, and it's like fully funded by the government, the doctors are just going to just remain impartial, remain objective, and go, this is what I've learned in my studies, and this is the outcome, and this is the cause, and this is how we're going to treat it. And if you don't want to take it, then I can't help you. And that's very objective that way. In ECE, when the government funding is very little, and then a lot of it comes from parents paying their fees, then they go, I've got 2 masters now, and when one of my parents say, no, we're not going to do this, and no, we're going to do that, then they're going to go, okay, maybe I might have to step back a bit on what I know, what my principles are, what I've been taught, and what's my professional values, and try to accommodate. Yep, correct, and find that fine balance, so that we can try to make it work. And I think that's where a lot of the problems the cracks start to appear. And hence, part of that problem that starts to appear is that they are babysitters, that they're not professionals. If I say no, and if I say I disagree, and if I throw my weight around, and they come back and they go, yeah, okay, we'll accommodate you, then it doesn't have that kind of professional thing to it.
I suppose, we wouldn't throw our weight around. We'd never do that. Yeah. But we would like to engage in a conversation with them. But at the end of the day, if that is what the parent wants, we will do our best to accommodate the parent.
And it's and it probably comes down to because they help pay the bills.
Well, and a lot of it, I think, is that respect. As early childhood teachers, we are taught to respect the relationships with other people, and that there's more than one point of view, and there's more than one way about going about things. But then, I do feel that there are strongly those things that we need to have available, which are those different areas of play and, which is something that parents don't understand. And even now within the sector, there's a lot of areas of, I suppose this comes from my play centre background. Yep. Montessori also has all of those sort of areas. Reggio has their own beliefs about areas and what needs to be made available. Yep. But there's so much information now that it's quite hard, I think, for new grads or people that are new into the sector, unqualified, to filter through everything and prioritize, what really is important. And that's where we need to go back to our curriculum. And that's what we need to promote with our parents, is we have a curriculum. Just like primary school has a curriculum, we have learning outcomes for your children. We're measured against those learning outcomes by ERO. And I don't know if parents really understand that. When they read an ERO report, I don't really know be a good question to ask parents. What are you looking for when you read an ERO report? Have you ever read the ERO report? Centres are required to provide an ERO report.
Right.
It has to be made
Yep.
available.
Yep.
But a parent really has to ask for it.
Yeah,
or
no,
it can be on the website. Yeah.
You know, I don't. I know that this is just my perception. I don't know how accurate it is, but no, I think a lot of parents base their decisions on, is it on the way to work for me?
Yeah.
What are the fees like?
Yes.
What are the fees? Do they provide free meals? That would be great.
Yeah.
There'll probably be an element of if a friend recommended it, and if they know that friend or neighbor, and they go, yep, they go there, and they look after my kid well. That's okay.
And when they go to school, they start looking at the zones. They'll move house. They will pay for private fees because it's the best school in the area. But when it comes to ECE, those factors don't come in. Nathan Wallace talks about that a lot. If you had $10,000 to invest in your child's education, what end would you put it at? You know, from birth through to when they graduate from university. And most parents will put it into those high school
The
years.
end.
Yeah, when what they need to understand is they need to be putting it in at the beginning. That's where those outcomes will show it at the end. But parents aren't, that hasn't been really communicated clearly. So it's really interesting that, as you say, they'll spend their priorities for choosing early childhood centre are quite different to their priorities when they choose a primary school.
Yeah. Well, my thoughts on that is I think a lot of parents, a lot of our parents anyway, they come from a time when the early ages was just kind of like, as long as you're safe, that's it. You know, so now that when their kids who are now us as we become parents now, you know, we were brought up also in that kind of environment where we were left on our own devices, and as long as we were safe, our parents thought we were fine, and I grew up fine. So why do I need to spend all that money in this? Yeah, there's talk about the early years being the most important. That could just be propaganda. The same way, it's probably the early childhood getting together and going, this is one way that we can try to promote and generate more income. But when I was a kid, my parents didn't do anything for my early childhood. They did nothing. I was just at home watching TV the whole day, and here I am, I'm fine. And but what I do remember a lot of, in terms of what was important for my career, what was important for new opportunities, was getting into the right university. So therefore, you know what? I think I should focus on that for my own kid. What do you think about that?
I totally agree. That's
that
the
could be one of
cultural
that.
values that education's based on. Yeah, that our views are completely based on. But as the research is coming through, you know, about the brain research, the results of the Canterbury study, all of those sort of things are starting to inform us that first 1,000 days is where the critical.
And I think it will take time
happen.
for that to happen, where people begin to realize that it's not motivated. It's not like that there was this whole agenda being created by the early childhood sector. You know, it is real research being done, showing that, you know, the first 3 years is really important, and that is really when you really want to invest in it, and because that makes the most impact in a child's life, especially as they grow up. And
but a lot of initiatives that there were aren't available for parents anymore. So there used to be an active play initiative.
Right.
So the Health Foundation ran that, and there were brochures that were put out, and parents, you know, had access to all of those brochures. There used to be TV programs. Like Judith Dobson had a TV show that was all about parenting, and I don't know whether parents are getting more of their information now from podcasts, for example, YouTube videos, whether there's been a shift. Social media seems to be a large part of it, but I mean, we would acknowledge ourselves in all our social media pages. There's so much conflicting information. How much of it is factual, and how much of it is like, oh, I just heard that. And I suppose that comes back to that. How do we spread information now, and what information is important, what information is accurate, and what information is merely a person's opinion?
Yeah, correct. How do you differentiate it, right? Because there's just so much information out there.
Yeah.
And they're so conflicting.
And parents don't have, in Auckland particularly, I think, there's a lot of parents that don't have a large family, you know, that they can look for support. They haven't necessarily even got their parents here to sort of say, well, what did you do, Mum? Or, and as you were saying now, there's been a lot of change where sometimes people are like, oh, you might have done it that way, Mum, but that's not how we do it today. I don't know that that's changed. I think that's a generational thing anyway, isn't it?
It takes time.
We all say that.
Yeah, and it takes time to kind of tackle that, you know, chisel that away. I mean, yeah, even though that was what you did before, and the outcome was fine, I suppose, doesn't mean that we can't do better.
So, just in this conversation, I'm thinking, well, you know, if the ministry decided that they were going to focus on one area of the curriculum, say, for example, well-being, because that would fit in really well with parents' priorities. So well-being is that they're cared for, that they, you know, can express their own needs and that those needs are met, etc., etc. Now, if they focused on prioritising that and promoting that and explaining that into the community about this is what you should be seeing within your early childhood centres, this is the curriculum, this is how teachers, you know, you should see this visible, maybe that would be a way to start it being seen as a profession. You know, when we choose a centre, we need to be looking for these key things. I know they do put out some information, but it's always in a brochure and I don't know how that really gets passed on to parents. They're usually in a foyer for them to pick up and...
Yeah. I mean, granted, it is going to be quite hard to send a message across.
But if it's about our curriculum and our professionalism and that we are teachers and that the government has set us standards that we need to, educational standards, educational outcomes for their children, then there might be a shift in, as you say, I think it'll be slow, but a shift in people's...
perception, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that will help, you know, I mean... Yeah, I think there's. I personally think I don't know whether this is actually true, but I just think that their focus is just providing financial support so that parents can leave their kids at the center. They want to try to make it, you know, 96 and then 98 and then hopefully 100%. And so all parents go back into the workforce, and you've got an economy that's producing, you know, and that will increase the net GDP because productivity goes up.
Continuation of the glorified babysitter role.
And then that comes in as well. But yeah,
and more and more pressures on teachers because they're working, you know, they're trying to communicate with each other, but it's across shifts and it's across weeks and it's quite challenging.
You're absolutely right. I think the whole bit about how different center sizes come into play, then in the different hours, and then trying to meet parents' needs because they also play a big part in sustaining the center. Trying to balance all of this makes it really hard to also try to counter that perceptive of ECE teachers being babysitters when there's so many other things that they need to work around. That perception thing maybe might take a backseat burner.
But even as centres, we will promote ourselves as we're caring, we're nurturing, so we kind of use the same language, babysitter language, that there's always in there about, you know, we're a regio-based centre, so, you know, learning is a priority, but then how are we actually making that visible?
You know, it's interesting you brought that up. I mean, a lot of centres that I visit, like, and I feel there's nothing wrong with it, but they like to always say, home away from home. And I really get that. And there's a lot of positiveness that comes out of it. You know, like, you know, when you feel comfortable, that's really only when you kind of really feel confident to wanna let yourself out there and put yourself out there and learn and be curious. If you don't feel safe, you don't feel comfortable. So the best kind of way to try to encourage that kind of mindset is to create a friendly, comfortable environment. And what better to do that than to create a simulation, like a home for the child. And so the term home away from home is very popular, but that lends itself very well into babysitting.
Babysitting, yeah. I totally agree.
Yeah.
And
I'm not saying it's a wrong it's a wrong word to say. Maybe there's a better one. I don't know.
I suppose that's when it comes back to unpacking what learning is happening for parents. And in learning stories, I mean, there's a lot of debate now because learning stories has been how we've done it for quite a long time. Mm-hmm. But now there's a lot of debate about whether learning stories are actually meeting families' needs, teachers' needs. Do we need to be doing it a different way? I don't have a solution to that one. Mm. I think a lot of the time, personally, it's about having that relationship with the parent, the conversation with the parent, and then you must read the learning story I've just written for them. Because it's on Story Park, it's on Educar, so parents are able to access it quite quickly. Yeah. But if parents aren't reading it or they're not really understanding it, I don't know. Maybe there needs to be some research done around that.
And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I like Educa. I like Story Park. I think it's great that as a parent myself, I get to sort of see what my kid is doing during the day. I say, this is, and it brings a smile, a real sense of delight that comes from, your kid's painting today, and such a beautiful painting, or that they're out playing the swing or whatever, and it kind of it brings joy to the day, knowing that they're having a good time. But what I don't really see, and this is my perception, what I don't really see is that all those stories that come through, it shows a progression. And if you see a progression that goes, look, we started off here, and and our aim was to teach them to learn on their own, or to take their own initiative, or to be, this kind of. I mean, I'm not talking about necessarily knowing how to write or count, but just general life skills, confidence, being curious, or being confident, the kind of things. Whatever the aim was, that doesn't really get translated in those learning stories. It's just more of an update. This is what your kid is doing, and yes, it makes you smile and certain delight during the day. But that's.
And that's where I totally agree with you. There's been noticed that there's a gap there. Often when Eero comes in and visits, that's what they will comment on, is that there isn't actually the learning stories, or your documentation isn't showing a progression. So your planning isn't saying this is where this child's at and this is where we'd like to see them
the outcome
next.
we want it to be.
Planning might be around, we've done Chinese New Year. So that was our cultural, so they've been exposed to a different culture. But it can be much greater for that individual child. So it might be that they were exposed to their own culture and they got to bring their own culture in from home. They stood up and talked in front of others, so they demonstrated a confidence that they didn't have before. Those kind of things. But teachers are a little bit wary often about how much to tell a parent. So if there was a video of them painting and they were hand painting, which a lot of parents... it's horror to see their hands covered in paint. Right. But if the teachers then went on to talk about how they were having this textural experience and it was strengthening all of their fingers and getting them prepared for writing, does a parent want to know that when they're on the swing, that it's actually working their vestibular system, which will support their balance, and it will support their ability to stand straight and sit still? And do parents want to know that? Some parents do. I think a lot of parents do. But teachers often make that judgment, and I don't know that they should. they should be putting that content into the stories in
Right.
a, doesn't need to be a scientific manner, I don't think, but
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know. As a parent, would that make a difference to your enjoyment?
No, I think for me, I'll be fine, but I acknowledge that I may not be thinking like all the other parents, and there will be some who will be probably, have a different mindset. Will probably be more concerned about their safety. Go on a swing. Um, I'm not particular. Some may not be particularly interested in the whole hand-eye, coordination. They're just thinking about what if they fall, hit their head, and get permanently head damaged. What's going to happen there? So I think that will be part of it, and that's probably why the fear of a teacher to want to include saying stuff like that. No, it sounds like it is a complicated issue.
Very, yeah.
Yeah. And just my feeling around it is the fact that because the government isn't so involved in terms of the I don't know if that's even the right thing to say also, but they do provide certain level of funding, but I do think they are very constricted by budget, and because they also see it as a privatized industry, where owners are also doing it for business purposes. They do, I suppose, expect that the fees that parents will pay will also help them, and so therefore they don't want to get too involved, and that creates certain complications as well, because when you get into education, something which is a service in a way, but not really the type of service that sells a T-shirt or sells food, then it will create problems, because you're talking about trying to educate the child's life here, and when you're trying to have a business approach to it, things will fall through the gap. And that's why we are where we are, I suppose.
So yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, and even the ministry, I mean, they work on a minimum requirements. So, and then when you go in to look at a curriculum, so one of the requirements is that there's evidence of Te Tiriti o Waitangi is being acknowledged, respected and shared with the children. So what does that look like? Is that you use some te reo at mat time? Is that enough to meet the minimum standard? Because it's all very judgment based. And so there comes that as well,
Yeah. You see, just going back to a bit to what I said before, it's like imagining like restaurant owners, right? They're going, hey, look, we're having staff shortages in the kitchen. The government's not going to go in and go, look, let's try to support you. It's a private industry. You sort yourself out, and that's why I suppose that reluctance here in ECE, where they go, you guys are meant to try to support yourself out. We've done what we can with some funding, and therefore we do expect you to meet certain minimum ratios, and we do expect to perform certain audits and all that kind of stuff. But education is different.
It's completely different.
It's different.
So and I think a good way to explain that, as far as how the ministry actually sees primary through to high school as opposed to early childhood, is if you wanted to do a university paper on mathematics or literacy, there are subsidised papers that you can do at university, the University of Auckland, that are subsidised by the Ministry of Education, but only for primary school teachers. What the ministry provides for early childhood are things around child protection, so again, caring. How do we keep our children safe? I'm just trying to think. There is, I can't think of anything around curriculum, unless you are a centre of concern, and then you will be funded to have those areas addressed. But the ministry funding, as far as professional development for early childhood, is very limited, and it tends to still sit around those subjects of caring, nurturing, and not professionalism, professional educational outcomes.
We're gonna cut this up and just wrap it up. But there's one other thing that sort of came to my mind as well. Is like, when you go to when you look at all the other professional bodies out there, doctors, accountants, all that kind of stuff, they have in a way a certain representation in their body, and so doctors, I mean, they don't generally tend to feel. Okay, this is just my perception. Yeah, they can do an analysis, and they can say certain things, and they feel that they've done what's right by their profession, and if it's wrong, they know that whatever work they do will be reviewed, and if as long as they know that they've done the right thing, they are okay. That their peers will probably have made the same judgment or the same recommendation, and if it was wrong, as long as they follow their guidelines and they will be okay. I don't think there's any of such for teachers, and I could be wrong here, but and that's why there's all this kind of fear when it comes to saying something to a parent.
No, you're right. So the professional bodies that are kind of out there supporting the sector would be, the largest one would be the Early Childhood Council, and again that is directed entirely as an owner's. As far as teachers themselves, unless you join the union, and my personal experience has been that the union isn't that strong for ECE.
Supporting the teachers, yeah.
There really isn't any, but what I do want to say and make really clear is that teachers are exceptionally professional. They are professional teachers. They may be viewed as glorified babysitters by externally, but internally we view ourselves as professionals, and we strive all of the time to maintain that professional practice. And that is why there's so much burnout, because teachers are working so hard to achieve the best learning outcomes they can for their children. They're extremely dedicated. And that sometimes gets lost, and I think that also needs to be like a really important focus, is that they're special people.
So we've got to wrap up now, but it sounds like there are a lot of other things that we can talk about, and we might get you back in again to talk about teacher burnout. But thank you so much for your time, really appreciate it.
And thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.